So there's this photo circulating online right now, posted by the Unbox PhD account out of London. And honestly, it's kind of grainy, not the most flattering lighting, clearly shot from a distance by someone who maybe shouldn't have been that close to a film set. But none of that matters, because standing in that frame together for the first time on camera are Henry Cavill and Dave Bautista, Connor McLeod and the Kurgan, side by side, and something about seeing those two men in the same shot just hits differently than any official announcement ever could. This is the Highlander reboot, directed by Chad Stahelski, the guy who turned John Wick into one of the most influential action franchises of the last decade. Production has been grinding forward in London after a pretty significant delay. Cavill took a leg injury back in September that put things on pause, and fans have been hungry for any scrap of new material since then. But these set photos from Unbox PhD were the first real glimpse at both leads sharing actual screen space, and the internet predictably lost its mind. The road to get this film made has been genuinely messy. Lionsgate had the rights for years, and the project went through the kind of development hell that kills movies before they ever get made. Budget kept climbing, and at some point, Lionsgate just blinked and walked away. United Artists eventually picked it up. Amazon MGM Studios is handling distribution, and somehow Stahelski stayed attached through all of it. That kind of persistence usually means someone really believes in the material, and Stahelski has been vocal about how much this property means to him personally. No release date yet, but active production in London is a genuinely good sign. Now, to understand why this reboot matters and why the casting choices are so loaded with meaning, you have to go back to 1986. The original Highlander was, by most conventional metrics, kind of a mess. The plot jumps between centuries without warning. The mythology is delivered in these dense chunks of exposition. The budget was clearly limited, and yet somehow it became a cult phenomenon, because underneath all the chaos was something genuinely emotional and weird and unexpectedly moving. Christopher Lambert played Connor as this man permanently out of step with time. He gets wounded fatally in a battle in medieval Scotland, survives it completely inexplicably, and his clan, understandably terrified because this was the 1500s and people didn't have great frameworks for processing the impossible, exiles him. He rebuilds his life in isolation with a woman named Heather, and then he has to watch her grow old and eventually die while he stays exactly the same. That's the actual horror of immortality that the original film understood. It's not a gift. It's watching everyone you love get taken by time while you're stuck outside of it permanently. The whole mythology around that emotional core is wild in the best way. Immortals walking among regular people for millennia, knowing they can only die by decapitation, hunting each other through history in a contest called The Game. When one immortal kills another, they absorb their power and accumulated knowledge through something called the Quickening, which in the original film looks like a lightning storm tearing through the surrounding environment. Windows explode, electricity arcs everywhere. It's completely unhinged and also kind of beautiful. The whole thing builds towards something called the prize, which goes to whoever is the last immortal left standing. There can be only one. That line became so iconic it's almost impossible to say without irony now, but in context, it represents the entire existential weight these characters carry. Every friendship they build, every life they construct is temporary. Every other immortal they meet is eventually someone they might have to kill, or someone who might kill them. Sean Connery showed up in the original as Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, this Egyptian-born immortal with a Spanish name and a Scottish accent, portrayed by a Scottish actor. It made absolutely no logical sense, and Connery played it with complete conviction and zero apology, which somehow made it work perfectly. Ramirez becomes Connor's mentor, teaches him the rules and the history of the game, and then gets killed by the Kurgan before he can finish what he started. That loss hangs over Connor for the rest of the film. The reboot apparently spans from 1500 Scotland all the way to modern New York and Hong Kong. That Hong Kong detail is worth paying attention to. Stahelski used international locations in the John Wick films not just as backdrops but as actual participants in the action. The architecture, the layout of streets and buildings, all of it fed directly into the choreography. A sequence set in Hong Kong under his direction could be something genuinely special, especially with sword combat involved. There's also been mention of a Buddhist temple location, which opens up the possibility that Connor spent significant time in Asia between the 16th century and the present day. That would be a smart expansion of his backstory. He'd have had centuries to travel, to seek out knowledge about his condition, maybe to track down the history of the blade Ramirez left him, the sword forged by the Japanese swordsmith Masamune. Following that lineage eastward would give his centuries of isolation some narrative purpose beyond just waiting for the game to conclude. Jeremy Irons is reportedly playing the leader of an organization called the Watchers. In the Highlander series, the Watchers were a secret society that had existed for centuries, specifically to observe and document immortal history without intervening. The concept is compelling on paper. Humans who know the truth about these beings walking among them, who've dedicated their lives and their lineages to recording something the rest of the world doesn't even know exists. The tension in the show came from individual watchers who crossed the line from observation into obsession or outright hostility. There was even a splinter group called the Hunters, who decided immortals were existential threats and started actively trying to eliminate them. Irons is exactly the kind of actor who can make a character like that feel genuinely dangerous while keeping his motivations ambiguous. So that casting is exciting. The hope is the Watchers stay peripheral, a presence in the background that complicates things without taking over the central conflict, which should remain the game itself. That central conflict lives and dies on the Kurgan. Clancy Brown's original Kurgan is one of the great villain performances of 1980s genre film, specifically because Brown leaned into the character's complete indifference to anything resembling restraint. The Kurgan has been alive for millennia, and has spent that entire time becoming extraordinarily good at killing immortals. He doesn't have ambitions beyond winning the prize and accumulating power. He's not misunderstood, not tragic, not redeemable. He's a predator who genuinely enjoys what he does, and that simplicity made him terrifying in a way that more complicated villains sometimes aren't. Bautista is a genuinely different proposition. His physicality is obviously present. The man is enormous in a way that reads as almost otherworldly on screen. But what's developed over his career is real emotional range, and the Kurgan actually requires that. There needs to be something beneath the violence, some centuries-deep certainty that he is the inevitable winner of this contest, that every other immortal he's encountered has simply been practice. That kind of quiet conviction, rather than constant theatrical menace, might actually be more disturbing to watch than Brown's more chaotic approach. The fear Connor feels toward the Kurgan shouldn't come from brute strength. It should come from recognizing someone who has been doing this longer and is better at it and genuinely doesn't care whether they live or die as long as they win. The fight choreography is going to be the defining element of this whole project. Stahelski's entire reputation is built on action sequences that treat the audience like adults. Clear geography, visible technique, practical execution wherever possible. The John Wick films work because you understand exactly where every person is in a room, what weapons they have, and what the consequences of every exchange are. Sword combat in a Highlander film needs that same clarity, but with different physical logic. These weapons have weight and range and specific techniques behind them. Different immortals coming from different historical and cultural backgrounds would logically fight completely differently. A warrior from ancient times using techniques that predate formalized schools of swordsmanship versus someone who learned from a Japanese master versus someone trained in the European tradition. That variety in style could make the combat sequences genuinely educational alongside being exciting. The prize remains one of the original film's smartest decisions. It's never explained in specific detail, which lets it function as whatever the audience needs it to be. The implication is something like the accumulated knowledge and perspective of every immortal who ever existed, millennia of human experience compressed into a single consciousness. That could be transcendence, or it could be complete psychological annihilation. The Kurgan wants it because he believes power validates itself, that winning is its own justification. Connor pursues it because it's been framed as his destiny since Ramirez found him, but there's a real argument that Connor has never actually thought through what winning would mean. The reboot has the opportunity to interrogate that, to ask what kind of person survives centuries of loss and violence and still has enough humanity left to be worthy of whatever the prize actually is. Production is moving, the photos are out there, Stahelski is behind the camera. Whatever this film turns out to be, it's going to be loud,